Hey, this is Gina Grad.
Hi, this is Teresa Strasser.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Errico.
Hey there, this is Casey Cavalier.
I'm Rocky Rose.
And you are listening to The Jay Franzi Show.
Lucky you.
Welcome to The Jay Franzi Show, a behind-the-curtain look at the entertainment industry with insights you can't pay for and stories you've never heard. Now, here's your host, Jay Franzi.
Well, hello, and welcome to the show. I am Jay Franzi, and this is your backstage pass to the entertainment industry. This week, we get to talk with a pop rock recording artist. We get to talk with Miguel Antonio, the lead singer of the band Run With It. We'll talk to him about how his mental health has influenced their style, the song that tells their story, and we'll discuss their production style. Now, Miguel, he is an amazing artist and an all-around great person, and I can't wait to talk with him tonight. So if you would like to join in, comment, or fire off any questions, please head over to jfranzi.com. Now, let's get started. All right, sir. Well, let's go ahead and kick this off. Your music, I've been listening to it quite a bit. Got a very inspirational type feel to it, very positive messages.
Thank you, man.
How would you describe your musical style?
Our musical style, we tend to fall into the pop rock world, a little bit of edginess from a musicality standpoint. But like you said, we tend to just gear towards this in a way, like an uplifting perspective. A lot of my story comes from dealing with depression, anxiety, OCD, that kind of stuff, and trying to figure out how to fight through that. And so a lot of the writing comes from working those things out and trying to find a way to move forward and actually find hope in life.
Is that something you talk about?
Yeah, so we actually just filmed our first keynote where we did a whole night where it's basically extended storytelling with the songs themselves, telling the stories behind the songs, but going deeper into the concept of what does it look like to wrestle with your own mental health and to find resilience in that. And, you know, for me, it was one of the biggest moments for us was our producer. We worked with a guy named Josh Gleave. We have some connections in Nashville together. We love that town. And we were out there recording, and our producer, Josh Gleave, he looked at us and he was like, listen, I know the stories behind these songs, but no one else does. And so from that, we just started sharing the stories. I started telling the stories behind the songs on the road. And there was one time we were in a college out in the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas. And it was the moment we realized, like, sharing the stories, not just the songs, actually makes an impact. And I shared a story. It's called I Need a Light. It's about a night where basically I almost gave up on myself. Like, the depression became so heavy for myself that I got in a car, just started driving for hours, basically. And in my mind, I don't even know if I was planning on coming back home at that point. And something stopped me. I turned around and finally started to go back home, basically, and start to face everything that I was dealing with, and starting this really what became a decade-long journey of healing. And I shared that story. And we had started, like I said, at that point on tour, we were sharing that story like night after night. But we got done that night, and I put the guitar down, and we all got off stage, go out to meet the people just like we normally do. And we realized there was like a whole line of people ready to talk to us. And it was just story after story of people, you know, like, I deal with depression, and thank you. It makes me feel like I'm not alone. Another person sharing where someone had committed suicide that they knew, and they were trying to deal with the aftermath. Even another person, I remember talking about this idea, which was foreign to me because I deal with depression, but they're like, I don't understand this stuff. I don't get it. I don't deal with this, but I have a good friend who does deal with it. And this is helping me understand how I can be more empathetic to him. So yeah, that's something that especially our older work as a band, we poured a lot into. And we're actually diving deeper into it now, where we film this thing for the keynote and taking it out, hopefully in the college campuses, corporate environment, talking more and more about mental health and what that looks like, but in a different context, not just like essentially preaching to people, but trying to just share experiences and share it through art.
Now, you said that's something that you've been going through a decade of recovery or healing. Is that something you feel like there's an end in sight, or is it an ongoing battle at all times?
Yeah, for me, it's still a part of my life, but it's like I feel like I'm on the other side of a mountain in a way, where a lot of times I describe it as, especially in the beginning, like especially early 20s to mid 20s, most of the time of my life I spent just in pain. Like I felt an emotional pain at all times. And then if there was a moment I felt happy or I felt at peace, it was so rare. And it was like this special little nugget moment where now I describe it more that I live more in a joyous kind of environment. And then every once in a while that stuff, those things creep up essentially. But it's more of like, okay, I recognize that now. It's not necessarily part of who I am at this point, and I know how to deal with it. Like there's tools I can use to move past that. So I think the hope in it for people who are going through, like if there's someone listening right now that deals with that, maybe they're in that season where it's more that heaviness where they're feeling the pain all the time, is that you can get to a point where you're on the other side of that mountain. But I also don't want to give false hope to people, because it is still a thing that creeps up. But ideally you build tools in your life to combat that, to where it doesn't take over your life anymore.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. The actual struggle you have, is it one specific thing, or is it a type of feeling that you're struggling with?
So for me, mine was rooted in depression, like just overall, like the way I describe it is like an overall darkness, is almost like Eeyore kind of stuff where like there's just always this cloud over you. And to me, it was almost like a slightly numbing pain, if that makes any sense to people. And then anxiety, where I was constantly freaking out about things. And then also OCD. So OCD for me, it got to the point where I couldn't have people touch me. And it was hard to even leave my own room. There was a season of my life that I was convinced I had somehow, I was a pizza delivery. This sounds wild, but I was a pizza delivery driver, and I saw a white powder. And it's right. Do you remember the anthrax scare?
Oh, yeah. Yes,
way
sir.
back in the day? That was a big deal. I was convinced that this white powder was anthrax. And I had convinced myself that I was spreading anthrax all over my city, like to the point where it became debilitating. And it sounds so wild to me now, but like I was so trapped in it. And I'll never forget, there was a moment, especially when it came to touch. I had a mentor of mine, is this kind of like burly dude. Is not touchy-feely kind of guy by any means. And I was sharing the struggles I was going through. And I'll never forget that we were leaving, and this big old dude grabs me, wraps his arms around me, and just holds me. And I did not like that. Like it sounded like it was not like he was not being weird about
Right.
it, like in the sense of like sexual or anything. But like I think he knew I just needed to know
It's okay.
it was okay. And I remember just finally after like 30 seconds, just relaxing and letting that embrace happen. And that honestly, it was a breakthrough moment for me, where part of dealing with OCD is like exposure therapy, is cognitive behavioral therapy is what they talk about. But it's where you allow yourself, for example, that like if you have problems with people touching you, obviously you don't want unwanted touch in that regard. But like if you have a problem with like normal like touching and interactions, letting someone embrace you that way and letting the anxiety rise, and then you finally push through it, and then it goes up to a 10 or 11 and then all of a sudden you feel it go down to 6 or 7. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I can survive this. And it's like retraining your brain to live like a normal life in that regard. But yeah, it was again, depression, anxiety, and OCD. And I noticed the OCD pops up for me, especially even now when things just get overwhelming. So like the tools for me is basically my schedule is very important to me. So like Google Calendars, making sure I'm blocking out time for the things I know are important in my life to where I feel like life is not out of control. Because if I start feeling like life is out of control, then I start freaking out about everything. And I can feel those things welling up. But now it's more of a time of like, oh, okay, I recognize this. What do I need to do in my life to change? Did my schedule get out of whack? Am I not spending enough time with like just relaxing? Or like even my wife will remind me every once in a while, it might be good to like take a day off, which sometimes I'll take like a half a day off and watch John Wick or something. But even that becomes like, okay, I can recenter and I don't have to live in that anxiety anymore.
Well, it's good that you've found ways of managing it. Did you have any help to find ways to manage it?
Yeah, absolutely. I had many mentors. I'm lucky in the fact that I've had a lot of mentors in my life, who men and women, who have invested time in me, who have sat down with me, listened to my problems, listened to my shit, and then also pushed back on me when I was getting lost in my own thoughts or getting lost in my own world, or challenged me to get out. Don't trap yourself in your room. Go out there, do this, experience that. And then I also did counseling. Counseling was a harder thing for me. I remember knowing I needed to do it. And I remember driving into the parking lot of the counselor's office and then turning around and driving away. And it literally took a whole other year for me to drive back into that same parking lot in which I started. Yeah. And to get out of the car, which became a 1.5 year journey with that counselor. And that journey did end with the counselor finally being like, hey, I think you're good. Not that like you're perfect, but like, I think you have good tools and you have good mentors that if you want to end counseling, I feel good about it as a counselor. But that was a crucial part. Medication for a season of my life was good. I no longer use that just for my own personal reasons. Some of the side effects I didn't enjoy. And I noticed that some of these other tools were helping me. Although with a caveat for anyone listening, I do have friends that if they go off their medication, what they're dealing with from a physiological standpoint is at a greater level than where I was. So basically, just because I'm not doing that or someone is not doing it doesn't mean you shouldn't. Like, definitely try that out, work with your counselor, all those kind of things.
Well, I'm sure some things help other people in different ways. Like medication might help somebody more than the mentor. The mentor might help you more than something else. But do you know where the anxiety came from in the first place?
That's a good question, man. One of the earliest times I remember it, and this is honestly one of the reasons I started going to counseling. When I was 3 years old, I lost a sister. She was 3 months old, and she died of SIDS. And I remember several things, even though I was so young. One of the things I remember is being in a grocery store with my dad and my little sister, who was like probably 2 months at the time, very young. And some kids came up and were talking to her. And I was just like hanging out with the kids, talking to them, and they're talking to my sister. And my dad got really, really angry. And he like basically told the kids to leave. And he's like, what if they got her sick? And it's one of the first times, like one of my first memories. And then just a month later, she dies of reasons that we still to this day don't know.
Right.
I don't think my dad did anything wrong. I don't think he caused this, but I do think it probably attached to things I'm naturally inclined to as well. to where germs became a thing for me too. I don't know if you've seen As Good as It Gets, where he's like washing his hands. Jack Nicholson's washing his hands like over and over again and locking the doors over and over again, like that kind of stuff. Like that was also part of my OCD. So I do think dealing with the loss, or actually the lack of dealing with the loss of losing a sister in such a strange way at such a young age. And then my family after that fell apart because, I mean, how do you deal with that? I have 4 boys. I can't imagine losing one of them, you know, especially in a circumstance like we did with my sister. And, yeah.
There's a couple things you mentioned in there that I'm curious about. One is your dad. You know, when this happened, how did your dad handle it?
He lost it. He was a police officer at the time. And I remember the police officers coming to our house and having to subdue him, basically restrain him, because I mean, he just, again, God, I didn't know how to process what it was at the time, but I observed all of it.
Right.
And I remember him being on the couch screaming, and all these large men from the police department holding him down. I remember them taking all the guns out of our house for his own safety, for our own safety.
Is your dad still around?
Yeah. Like over time, over the years, him and I, we've had a rough go. I can say that publicly. I'm sure he would be honest about that too.
I hope so.
But he is definitely, yeah. Well, yeah, we are now. But he is now, you know, part of our lives, part of my boys' lives, very involved with that. But yeah, unfortunately became a thing that most of my family did not talk about until years later, and I didn't deal with. And I was 21 or 22, somewhere around that. I decided to stop at the graveyard where her gravesite was to visit the gravesite. And I was driving away. I was driving back to college. My dorm room was about 30 minutes away. And I had to pull over. Again, I'm a grown-ass man at this point. It's been 2 decades after this happened. I had to pull over because I was crying so violently that I couldn't even drive. And I had no idea what was happening. And that was kind of one of the starts of going to counseling to figure out what the hell is going on. And come to find out, like, the counselor said it's not uncommon for people to stuff their grief away for years, especially if you're a 3-year-old, you have no context on how to deal with emotional issues, right? And you're in a family that's not dealing with their emotional issues. He's like, you basically, after 2 decades, were finally ready to deal with this. And now you have to deal with this. Now you have to wrestle with this.
You can't even imagine how one would feel in those circumstances. I have 2 brothers, and luckily they're both still with us. And my parents are gone at this point, but my 2 brothers are still with us. And I absolutely cannot imagine your dad having to go through losing a child. Like you said, you've got your children, I've got mine. Yeah. I mean, I get upset when my kid stubs a toe. I mean, I can't imagine anything of something of a serious manner happening. But the 2 other things I wanted to talk about real quick before we change gears is the OCD part. You mentioned washing hands and flicking light switches. What goes through your mind during those times if you don't do those things?
Well, luckily, most of that is not really part of my life anymore. So I say that to give myself a second to think back to that era. So I was on a trip one time and talking to a friend, and she said, as we were trying to talk through all this, she was like, so it's kind of like when kids said, step on a crack, break your mother's back.
Right.
You actually believe it. And I looked at her, I was like, yeah, that's like, it's not actually true. Like there's a part in your brain that's like, that's not actually true. But the rest of your brain and your nervous system and everything else in your body is telling you, you're going to break your mom's back. In college, my roommates knew I had this issue. And so we'd be laying there at night and I'd go through the whole process of checking the whole apartment, everything. And then the whole apartment would get quiet. And my roommate, Danny, at the time, he'd just go, Miguel.
Oh. just mess
Did
with
you
you.
check the door downstairs and just fuck?
Well, that's the way to do it.
I was like, I hate you.
That's the best part right there. I mean, all these
Yeah,
are very serious topics, but I love when you can just mess with somebody. That's awesome. I'd be sitting there
Absolutely.
I'd buy a deadbolt and just be clicking it in the room. Like, did you hear that?
Click, click.
Click, click. Oh, that's bad.
Yeah. Even then, like we laughed about it, but I had to, like, it sucked because I was like, damn it. I know I did. I 100% know I
Right.
did. But I gotta get back up because, and honestly, it sounds so crazy now, but there was a clip from an Oprah show where a guy didn't lock his door, and in the middle of the night, someone came in and killed his entire family.
Oh, mercy.
And so
me.
at that point, I probably saw that damn show at like 9 years old.
You gotta lock the door.
My
Gotta
family
lock
was
the
going to
door.
die if I didn't. Yeah. And it became so, yeah, it's wild, man. But yeah, again, it was honestly one of the most powerful tools was the cognitive behavioral therapy. Talk therapy was helpful for a while, but the actual actions of leaning into the anxiety when you feel that anxiety, like instead of running away, like lean into it, and even to the point where like germs now, like sometimes I freak people out because I'll like be grilling something and it'll drop on the porch and I'll pick it up and eat it. Cause it's just like, that was like the process to get there. And it like, hell yeah,
Go to the extreme.
I'm not going to die.
Dude, I do that anyway. I don't have that phobia and I still do it. I pick things up off the ground. I'm fine with it.
Nice.
Like whatever. But I mean, there is, I probably have, my wife would probably say I have some OCD tendencies, and I'm sure I do. But luckily, it's never been anything that's, been a struggle or a problem. But you mentioned having a mentor. Now, is that a mentor that's helped you through life, or is it a mentor that's helped you through your career, or do you have mentors from both?
I have mentors in both. And I would say right now, like throughout my life, I've had different mentors have functioned in different ways. Most of them, probably in my 20s, were more just life in general. In my 30s, is one mentor that was a boss of mine. And he actually cared deeply about my personal life, but then also about my professional life. And that right there is probably where I saw the most growth. And then I do have a mentor now. It's a business coach, but half the time we talk about personal things anyway, because in general, it seems like it's our internal life that's going to affect our work. It's going to affect our art. It's going to affect how we do our business, of how it affects how I walk into a room for a gig. It affects how I walk on a stage to get ready to speak, and making sure that I'm on the right path, I guess, the right track.
Well, sometimes it just takes that one person in your life to show you things in a way you didn't see them yourself, and it allows you to get through things.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Let's use that moment there as you talk about the stage and so forth to transition into your music. I mentioned at the start that your music is very positive, has a very positive, forward-moving feel to it. So which song of yours would you say encompasses your recovery and your path?
That's interesting. So we have a song called I Need a Light. And that one, it's like the beginning of the story.
Okay.
It talks about that night where I was just driving. Basically, it talks about the night that I realized I couldn't live with this pain anymore. And so I had to make a choice. And I had to figure out whether or not I was going to walk down a path, or whether I was going to keep running to wherever the hell that would lead, or I was going to actually face what was going on inside. So that, in a sense, that's one of the most, it's almost like the cornerstone song for me as an artist. And our most recent release, it's called It's Not Over. It's interesting because this song is a shift, because even the song, we have songs that are getting ready to come out here soon, which take a whole other turn. which aren't even about some of the same topics we've ever even talked about.
Growth.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing I realized, the healing and going through this process, like I said, it was over like a decade and a half of work, was vital, was important. But I realized there came a point where I was identifying with my depression and anxiety to a point where that was almost defining who I was, as opposed to realizing like, no, that's just a part of who I am. Like there's, in a sense, Rick Rubin talks about how an artist is a prism and you shine a light through it and you get all these different colors.
Right.
So I feel like It's Not Over encompasses this idea of like, I'm not going to be beaten down anymore. I'm actually going to rise up and I'm going to find a way to win. I'm going to find a way to walk in victory. And it's fitting because, like I said, our next two songs.
Before you go too far down the road to another song here, I want to talk about each one of these because I have some questions. You started off with "I Need a Light," and how that's the start. It's the initial story. Do you feel like the dynamics in that song play a part in that as well, where there's such a drastic difference between the verses and the choruses?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think when I actually sent that as an acoustic track to our producer, Josh Cleve, and he told me later, he asked me to send him a bunch of different songs. So I sent a ton. I think we wrote like 60 songs or something, sent it to him. He listens to that one. And he's like, I listened to it. I go through everything. I hear that song. I took my dog for a walk. I came back. And then he essentially demoed out almost what you guys hear in the recording. Like we went in and re-recorded it later over, but like those huge drastic drops. And it really was it's funny. I've never really thought about it, but like it really does describe that time because there were so many, like there were great things that happened even during that season, but man, the lows were low and the highs were kind of exceptional in that sense too. That's a great question.
Well, it's definitely powerful.
Well, thank you.
So you mentioned the production there. Can you talk a little bit about his production style and how it came together?
Yeah, Josh is an interesting person. He's become a good friend over the years. He's been through a lot of the highs and lows with me, even before Run With It was a thing. And then as we were shopping for producers, I knew him for probably about 4 or 5 years at this point. We were trying to figure out who we wanted to work with. We knew we needed an outside voice. And for artists who are listening out there, I think even though you got the vision, right? And even though you got the talent, I think having an outside voice who can bring some sense to things and maybe wrestle some things down for you is really, really vital. So Josh was one of them we were working at. I met with him and then I sent him some tracks to Run With It was working on at the time as I Need a Light. And it was funny. There's this one song we had, it's called Talks to Angels. It's not even out there anymore. We killed the song. Basically we started as a R&B rock thing with like this, it just way different than the pop rock thing we were doing. Anyways, there was a song called Talks to Angels. We thought it was awesome. It was 4/4 time. And then in the breakdown, we did a time signature change to 6/8 and did this like cool thing that as artists, we were like, this is amazing. Right. And he's like, dude, I really like that song, but I don't understand what you're doing in the bridge. Like, I don't know why you did it. And it kind of kills the vibe of the song. So he added criticism, very specific criticism. And then he said, and I think if you kept the same time signature and then did a solo here, kind of like this, X, Y, Z, I think it would be better. And then I told him, I think you're wrong. and he,
awesome.
But
That's
luckily
what
at this
every producer
point,
wants to hear.
As a band, we have been writing long enough together that even when we thought each other was wrong, we committed to doing the idea because we might find out that it was good. So I told him that. I was like, we're going to give this a shot. I think you're wrong. He goes, cool. Why don't you give it a shot? Let me know what you think. We tried the exact idea he gave us, and we all looked at each other and like immediately we're like, oh yeah, he was way right. That's so much better. And so from there, that started this
He knows what
relationship
he's
with
talking
him,
about.
built off trust, and it's increasing trust as we move forward, where I know that he's going to tell me his honest opinion. I know that we can disagree, but I also trust the fact that probably a lot of times he's just going to be right in that regard. And we spend enough time with each other, his production style. So he writes for country artists, like big country artists is kind of his day job. But then he produces for rap artists, rock artists, and other country artists as well. So he is really great at trying to disseminate from an artist, like, who are you? How can I take who you are and make you better? And I think there's some producers that almost want to put their stamp on it, where you can tell he is just so great at saying, like, who are you? How can I make you better? And maybe even give you the things that you didn't even know you wanted. You know, like the dubstep thing that he put on I Need a Light. I had no idea how to ever communicate that. Over the last several years, I've learned better at, like, what's in my head, how to articulate it. But like when he sent me that, I was like, yes,
Right.
that's exactly what I want. So yeah, that's, I guess in general, well, just to wrap that up, like in general, I think his style is studying an artist, building rapport with an artist, and then getting the best out of that artist.
So do you feel that he contributes to the writing process?
In the beginning, he did not as much. He actually, I think when we made How to Start a Fire, which is what I Need a Light was on, I think he saw himself more as a producer. We took that EP, went on the road, did a whole bunch of different things. During that time is where he started this track of becoming a songwriter. And I think it was like this untapped thing that was in him, where now, like, the last time we were in the studio, we were there in January, and he had just such great insight from a songwriting perspective, from a production perspective, and even he's coached so many, like, high level vocalists now in the studio, that he was busting my ass as a vocalist in the studio too. And I was like, dude, this is great. Like, he's like, nope, try that again. Try a little more like this, you know? And so I think for him, it's been a journey as well to figure that out. But yeah, now I would say this summer, we have some songs coming out, Night Watch and another song called Ghost, that he definitely was speaking into the writing perspective as well, and really pushing us on the story, and really pushing us on, like, how we're going to continue to captivate the audience with the story of the song.
Nice. So you mentioned going down there and into the studio. Is down there in Nashville?
Yes.
Yeah. What studio?
I guess
would you be
technically
talking
for
about?
us, it's more over there.
Either way, close enough.
So How to Start a Fire, we recorded, he rented out studio space with a bunch of other producers just off Music Row. It was shared a parking lot with Studio B. Is that the main one, right?
Yeah, it's RCA Studio B.
Yes, that's the one. So I remember walking out from our little basement under optometrist place, sitting,
Where all good
during the middle of
studios are.
sessions. Right. And then watching, like, all these tours come into Studio B.
Right, because that's where Elvis recorded.
Kind of a big deal.
Yeah, a little bit.
And what was amazing, though, is, like, even in that studio, and it's one reason we love going there, even when we were going to record the album, my wife, like, encouraged us. She's like, I think you need to go. She's like, every time you go there, you come back, like, just fired up. And because, like, in that same studio, again, under optometrist, like, basement studio, nothing interesting about it. I'm going into the different rooms. I had to go grab something out of another producer's, like, studio that he worked alongside. And I realized he had gold records that he had stacked on his couch because he didn't have enough places to put them. And I'm like, that's the same dude. Yeah, that was the same dude who's, like, eating a microwave burrito with us, in this little, like, thing they called the green room, but really it was just like a little hole. And so I'm like, everywhere you go, it doesn't matter if it's a basement of an optometrist, everyone's better than you. This is awesome.
It's true. I have been in that parking lot. I've never been into that studio, but I remember I was in that parking lot, and Dan Huff, one of the biggest producers in the world, came out of that studio with somebody. and we sat there in the parking lot and talked for quite some time, but I've never actually made it into the studio. But RCA Studio B, I did.
I've never
make it
been
into.
in either.
Yeah, that I've made it into. I'm a member of AES, the Audio Engineering Society, and
That's awesome.
I was on the board in Nashville for a while. And we went into RCA Studio B with the A-Team, the team that played behind Elvis for all of his number one hits.
Wow.
And we went in and we did a live demo with that band playing in that room, and we brought it through all the old equipment. It was a very, very cool moment.
That's awesome, man. I love it. He has another studio now on Music Row, is about a block down from the same place, and then is also producing out of his own house that he has too, which is just outside the city. So he's kind of doing back and forth out there. And it's a great lesson to me too, because when we go there, like there's a lot of like humble things about it. Like it's great equipment, but he's like, you can make great records in a basement,
Absolutely.
man. Like there's some killer shit that they're making in those little basements out there in Nashville.
Dude, I worked in Nashville for 20 years, and the work in Nashville, no matter what studio you're in, you're dealing with the best players in the world. And it's not about, I mean, the equipment helps, having nice microphones and nice gear and all that stuff does play a part. But it really comes down to the hands of the artist. I mean, the person playing the instruments, they can make a toy sound great. So it really is all about that. But you talked about It's Not Over, your latest single. And again, that has a vibe to it. It's got that positive feel to it. Matter of fact, one of the lines in there reminded me of the Rocky movie, where he talks about how hard he can get hit, but keep on moving forward.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that song.
Well, so we recorded the album, How to Start a Fire, the EP, and we started touring a ton. Basically, I'm married, got 4 kids, and I saw my bandmates for about 2 years more than I did my own family because things were going really well. We toured to the Middle East and back doing all this great stuff. But the reality was, like, even though we were seeing all this success outwardly, money wasn't quite catching up, because if any artist listening to this, you know how much money you have to put back into it. And then if you've ever spent time on the road, you know how much money that costs to keep things moving forward. And because of the goals we had, we knew even more money, at least at the time, thought we needed to pour a bunch of cash to get to this other echelon that we're trying to reach.
To the next level.
Exactly. Almost becomes like its own Ponzi scheme in a way, right? And that could be a whole other podcast. But I remember sitting at our kitchen table, rare time, I was home, going through the spreadsheets, trying to get the math to math, basically, and realizing it just wasn't mathing anymore. And I was frustrated because I couldn't pay myself. I was frustrated because I couldn't pay the guys what I thought they deserved. I was frustrated because we were calling in so many favors with friends who were talented in video and photography and producing all these things, where I'm like, I always had a vision of being the kind of business owner that's like helping provide for other people. Instead, I felt like I was like taking from other people. And then from there, like we, as a family, we put all of our money into it. We drained the 401k, did all that kind of stuff. I was full-time in this thing, and basically realizing we were probably on the verge of losing our house at that point, getting letters about foreclosure. And I got scared. And like, I literally felt like for 2 years, I've been getting hit in the gut every single day, punched in the mouth over and over again, feeling excited though I'm about to get back up and win this fight. And that was kind of the last 1-2 punch that kicked me to the ground. I told the band, I told my wife first. I didn't ask anyone. I told everyone, which in retrospect, I wish I would have had conversations with people. But in my mind, I just was done. And so I told my wife, I'm done. We're not doing this anymore. I called the guys up who had sacrificed so much and basically was like, we're done. And it was brutal for them. And I had concluded I was done in general with music. Like I was ready to walk away at this point. But weeks, days, weeks, months went by, and I realized I was starting to die inside, essentially. And it was actually my wife. Is one of those nights where you drink, you start with an empty or a full whiskey bottle, and by the end of the night, it's empty. And it was a conversation with my wife where she's like, "I know you can figure this out. Like, I know there's got to be a way." And I'm very lucky that she's so supportive of it. And then again, it was a mentor that came along, a friend of mine, Chad Burquin, who's a business mentor for me and kind of life coach in a sense, like we talked about earlier, who started showing me better rhythms of living in the music industry in ways that maybe you don't have to just buy into the Ponzi scheme of the whole damn thing and make it sustainable and actually enjoy the ride, because instead of feeling like you're getting beat up all the time. And so that started getting me the strength to essentially get back up, if you will, and join the fight. And I was doing a solo career. I started a solo career at that moment, and I was in Nashville. I was actually at my friend Josh Gleaves' loft that he had down there, and I was sleeping on his floor. He had writing sessions all day, so he just let me have the run of his place. And I started writing that song, "It's Not Over," about getting back into the fight, and we're going to keep fighting until we actually win. And then as time went on, I actually got the courage to reach out to the guys and say, "Hey, do you want to do this again?" And there was some shuffling in that. One of the original members wasn't able to join us, which is really hard. We're still connected. We worked a lot of things out, still close now. But then from there started rebuilding and now trying to figure out how to be more strategic with what we do. Because there was a season, man, where I literally said yes to everything that came our way. And honestly, I think it's part of a season for a band. I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but there's times we went to New York City to play a show for free where someone's like, "Hey, you want to play this thing?" I was like, "Yep." And I built a 2-week tour off of it, where I probably wouldn't do it now where we're at. We've moved further down the road, but at the time, in a sense, it got things stirred up for us. But now we're trying to be more strategic instead of just stirring things up. How do we build this specific thing here? How do we build this specific thing there? But yeah, that's where It's Not Over started, and in a sense kind of propelled us to getting back together as a band.
All right. Again, you mentioned a few more things in there. I want to make sure that we don't leave them untapped. So first, It's Not Over. Let's talk about the rap piece. Can you tell us how that came about?
I love rap. I want to be a rapper. I've concluded.
We're experiencing technical difficulties here, folks.
But I have concluded that I'm probably not the best rapper in the world. I have my strengths, but I can do a really good, Lose Yourself Eminem cover. I can do well with that, but I wanted to bring a real rapper into what we did. And the Royal Chief is someone who I became a fan with just following online. I had him on my podcast, Live and Create. I had a really good vibe with him. And I was in the studio. This was a different producer than Josh Gleave at the time, a guy named Matt Richards. And we were working together. And I just looked at him and was like, "Okay, what do you think on the bridge? What if we bring in this rapper?" And I showed him one of his songs called Pipelines. And he was like, "Dude, let's do it." And really kind of a dream of mine is to do more and more collaborations with other rap artists in the future to bring kind of the pop rock thing mixed in with great rappers. Cause honestly, most of the time I'm listening to music, it is probably going to be rap. It's going to be J. Cole or Kanye West or that kind of stuff.
Dude, we had Bruce Ryder on the show. He's the engineer for Five Finger Death Punch.
Nice.
And I don't know if you're familiar with Five Finger Death Punch.
Yes.
But rock band that occasionally brings in a rapper to sing along with. And that's, to me, where some of the stuff could lean towards. It doesn't quite make it there because you got more of a pop feel than a rock feel to it.
Right.
But it feels like a lot of the stuff could lean that way and has a lot of similarities, even though there's a little bit of a difference in the genre. So I like it. I like that feel.
Absolutely.
For sure.
I'm glad you dig it. Yeah, our guys were constantly writing. Writing is one of our biggest focuses. And even the last several weeks, I've been focused on some other bigger projects. But the rest of the guys have been getting together. We're a 5-piece. they've been getting together and writing, and they're sending me clips of some stuff. And some of it sounds almost, it's funny you brought it like a heavier band. There's one vibe that's almost like a Static X kind of like heavy rock groove with it. And I was like, damn, this could be really cool with a rapper too. So we'll see where that goes.
It leans that way in some cases like this. Even I Need a Light, having that difference in dynamics, I felt like it could have gone heavy. It could have gone heavier than it did. So, I mean, it does have a tendency to lean that way, and I think you guys could pull it off very easily.
We'll see what happens, because I know, so previously, the way we wrote was I wrote a ton of stuff. I would write 60 songs, 90 songs, whatever, and send them all to the producer, which was Josh Gleave at the time. And then we would sift it down to a few songs that we're going to actually record. Where we decided last year, like we were actually going to collectively start writing together. So the next 2 songs we have coming out were our first 2 where as a 5-piece, we like hashed out, like we just started writing song after song after song, hashing out things together, trying to understand each other more personally. And that's one reason we're excited about those 2 songs too, because it's more this collaborative effort. One of our guys is in like this prog metal band. Our bass player is also in a prog metal band. So it'll be interesting to see how some of those heavier influences start coming in, because it is definitely a collective work now, which I'm excited about too. And because I think it makes Run With It something a little more special than just an individual. And then strangely, it's freeing me, because I also have these solo things I'm working on that are completely divergent with like almost Americana type stuff that would never really fit in what we're doing, where it almost makes me feel free to like mess around with that from time to time.
You say that, but you have songs here that are kind of folk-like as well. I mean, Time has got kind of a folk feel to it.
That's true.
It's kind of got like that,
That's true.
Almost like a Mark Knopfler type feel to it.
Yeah.
So I think the style of the band is very diverse. I think it has a little bit of everything. So I think anybody could listen to it, and as long as you can appreciate music, I think you're going to find something you love in it.
Well, thank you.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, though, you mentioned the guys and playing and stuff. Do they actually play the parts in the studio?
Yes. Yeah. So with one caveat. So the stuff that's How to Start a Fire, the guitar parts, we brought in a ringer for that. And his name is escaping me. At the time, he was like 20. And where that came from, because I was the only guitarist in the band at that time. And my main thing is singing and writing. Like I play guitar out of necessity. And actually, I'm constantly putting my guitar down during shows to the point where the band has actually got mad at me. We drove away from a show at 2 a.m. one time. They're like, listen, you cannot just put your guitar down and just start singing. Because I love singing and jumping out in the crowd. And that's what I want to do. So what happened was in the studio, back to Josh Gleave, his candor. We got to the part where we were about to do a solo. It's a song called One More Fight. And he spun around in his chair and he goes, so I think you might be able to pull this off if you worked for maybe 3 weeks straight. But
I can pull someone here who can do it in 3 minutes.
Yeah. He's like, I got a guy who would do better than what you could probably ever do. And like you said, in 3 minutes. And no joke, that kid did it. And he did 2 takes, used the first take. And then he ended up just having him play a ton of the different parts. And then when we play live, at the time we were a 3-piece. When we played live, I would just learn his parts. And then the one solo he did, that particular one he talked about, we scrapped from our live performance. And we actually did that song acoustic piano, and I played on piano because there was no way in hell I was going to be able to pull that off effectively. So we're like, we got to go a different direction. We're a 5-piece now. So we have lead guitarist Cody Ryan Stapleton, no relation, but is a killer guitarist. And it's cool too, because he was left-handed, but his dad was right-handed. So he wanted to play his dad's guitar. So he just learned how to play upside down and does that whole thing. and he does amazing. He basically takes the guitar parts of the old stuff and makes them fresh. And then now he's writing like our next 2 songs. Once we release them, obviously I'll send them your way too, but you'll hear like his riffs have become a crucial part of what we do. Then we have a keyboardist and a background vocalist, to where before I was playing keys and the producer was doing keys, that kind of stuff.
Who played the piano on Your Own?
On Your Own that was Josh Gleave. He played piano on that.
He did a great job.
Yeah, that dude, he plays all the things.
He has more talent than anyone deserves. All right, sir. Well, we do this thing here we call Unsung Heroes, where we take a moment to shine the light on somebody who works behind the scenes or somebody who may have supported you along the way. Do you have anybody you would like to shine a little light on?
It's a good question. I thought about it, and I was going to say Josh Gleave because he's actually a pretty behind-the-scenes guy, even though he's so accomplished.
Too.
But I've talked about him enough. Yeah, I've talked about him enough. That I would say is Chad Burquin. And Chad Burquin is, one, he's a guitarist in a band called Big Time Grain Company. His brother is the front man named Brett Burquin. He's a great dude as well. And they're just killing it as a red dirt country band. They've built an incredible business to where a lot of people probably don't know who they are, but they're probably making more money than most other bands.
Most label artists aren't making money at all.
Exactly. And they're having a blast doing it. That's what attracted me to them, is like, I noticed the people that work for them, the hired guns, all their sounds, everyone, they treated them so well. I mean, I was like, can you teach me how to do this? This is kind of what I was gunning for, But he's, not just the business side, but again, from that personal side, he's been there to support me through so many things. There was a period of time where I was running shows for him, and at the time I was doing endurance racing, and I ended up literally ran myself into the hospital. I ran 30 miles and ended up in the hospital.
You don't do anything unless you go all the way, do you?
Absolutely. It is the personality type that I have. But even during that season, the way, he reached out to my wife and was reaching out to me, even though like it caused probably a lot of hardships because I was running one of their big stages with a bunch of different bands coming in, doing all that, where he cared more about the person than the job. And he showed that time and time again, where we've now known each other probably over almost a decade, if not over at this point too. But to have that ability to build an incredible business, but to care about the people around him more than the business itself is such a powerful thing. So yeah, I would say he's my unsung hero. And I'd almost venture to say he's probably a lot of other people's if you got him on the podcast, because he doesn't talk about it as much, but he's definitely invested in a lot of other artists too.
A big thanks to Miguel for taking the time to share his stories with us. And as always, thank you for taking the time to hang with me here. I really do appreciate it. If you know anybody that would be inspired by his story, please be sure to pass this along. You can do that and find the links to everything mentioned over at jfrancie.com/episode 75. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Jay Francie Show. Make sure you visit us at jfrancie.com. Follow, connect, and say hello. This episode has been brought to you by VR Knives, your source for 100% custom knives made by a true rock star. So, if you're in the market for a new piece of art, reach out to VR Knives. 407-421-5528. 407-421-5528.